Okay, our leaders might serve but never govern. Women, yeah. That each group was to be autonomous. Now that's another really unique idea. See, this group, for example, if it wished to, instead of having me up here, talking about the Big Book, you could have a Baptist preacher up here if you wanted to, preaching a sermon and getting everybody to come up here and be saved. Or if you wanted to, you could, oh yes you could.
You could only talk about Alcoholics Anonymous.
But in a group, it is possible to do anything you want to do, so long as you don't harm Alcoholics Anonymous as a fellowship or other groups. If you take a look in the in Language of the Heart, this is explained in some detail. Autonomous means exactly what it says. A group can do anything it wants, so long as it doesn't harm AA or other groups. And that exact example, by the way, is used in the literature. It also talks about having a belly dancer or something. So.
Neither of those are allowed here.
Pardon?
Neither of those are allowed here.
Well, of course. I'm certainly not suggesting that they're allowed in this. I'm saying that if the group decided they want to do that, there is no way to enforce their dereliction from the norm, because there are no AA police, and the group cannot be pushed out of the fellowship. You don't lose your charter. There's no way to discipline a group. Even if the group is doing something which would harm AA as a whole, there's no way to discipline. So that's what autonomy means. Totally free to do. But you see, alcoholism is a self-cleaning oven. So a group that does that is not going to last. They'll be gone. That's the way it works. That's our police force is old man alcohol himself and the disease. Because when we begin to violate these spiritual principles, we lose our spiritual edge and the group dies. And I've seen that happen a lot of times. There was be no professional class of therapy. That's another really interesting one, because and today there are a lot of folks who come in here and they look around and they say, wow, the thing I better do is get myself a ticket to become a counselor, and I can really carry the message that way. Generally, that turns out to be a serious problem, because if we're hired by someone to carry their message and we're being paid to carry their message, it's hard to keep that separated from our 12-step work, where we're carrying God's message and where we have no agenda, where we're leaving the results up to Him. And a lot of people who try to do that find that they have serious difficulty doing it. Our 12-step work is done without expectation of any return whatsoever. A professional class of therapists, of course, would be people who charged for their services, and would be, if AA were to sanction such a thing, you can imagine we have a nice plaque, Alcoholics Anonymous, Jim Bramble, professional AA therapist, and hang it up on the wall. And at that point, I'd be able to start charging a whole bunch of money. I mean, some of these people are getting like $200 an hour now. I'd be cheap. I'd just do it for $100 an hour. Some guy down Alvarado asked me the other day, said, "You charge for your 12-step work?" I said, "No, gosh, no. Why did you ask me that?" "Oh, I don't know. You just look like you probably did." This is the same guy who said it's only a book. So I guess he got a jaundiced view of us. All right, let's go on here now. Oh, by the way, in California, there's a kind of unique bunch of people out there. They call themselves interveners. You ever heard of that? And they do this professionally. Most of them claim to be members of AA. And what they do is, you're the family of an alcoholic, and you're at wit's end, and you don't know what to do. And so you've heard from your somebody at the office or somebody in your family that this wonderful intervener is over here. So you get in touch with him or her, and they come to your house. The alcoholic, of course, can't be there. And then they sit there and they tell you how they're going to intervene and get this drunk straightened out. And then they want money up front. Now, it used to be that the money up front was only $800 or $1,000. I understand they're now up in the $2,500 range. They get their money up front, and then what they do is they set it up so that the alcoholic is going to be in a place where he or she can't escape. And the intervener will be there. And remember, there was be no professional class of therapy. That's another really interesting one, because and today there are a lot of folks who come in here and they look around and they say, wow, the thing I better do is get myself a ticket to become a counselor, and I can really carry the message that way. Generally, that turns out to be a serious problem, because if we're hired by someone to carry their message and we're being paid to carry their message, it's hard to keep that separated from our 12-step work, where we're carrying God's message and where we have no agenda, where we're leaving the results up to Him. And a lot of people who try to do that find that they have serious difficulty doing it. Our 12-step work is done without expectation of any return whatsoever. A professional class of therapists, of course, would be people who charged for their services, and would be, if AA were to sanction such a thing, you can imagine we'd have a nice plaque, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous, Jim Bramble, professional AA therapist, and hang it up on the wall. And at that point, I'd be able to start charging a whole bunch of money. I mean, some of these people are getting like $200 an hour now. I'd be cheap. I'd just do it for $100 an hour. Some guy down in Alvarado asked me the other day, "So you charge for your 12-step work?" I said, "No, gosh, no. Why did you ask me that?" "Oh, I don't know. You just look like you probably did." This is the same guy who said it's only a book. So I guess he got a jaundiced view of us. All right, let's go on here now. Oh, by the way, in California, there's a kind of unique bunch of people out there. They call themselves interveners. You ever heard of that? And they do this professionally. Most of them claim to be members of AA. And what they do is, you're the family of an alcoholic, and you're at wit's end, and you don't know what to do. And so you've heard from your somebody at the office or somebody in your family that this wonderful intervener is over here. So you get in touch with him or her, and they come to your house, going to intervene and get this drunk straightened out. And then they want money up front. Now, it used to be that the money up front was only $800 or $1,000. I understand they're now up in the $2,500 range. They get their money up front, and then what they do is they set it up so that the alcoholic is going to be in a place where he or she can't escape. And the intervener will be there, and members of the family, and they will confront this poor person. But that's not the end of it, because the intervener has established ties with various treatment centers. So they get a bounty. So as soon as they capture this poor drunk, they haul him off to a treatment center, and then the intervener gets paid by the treatment center as well. So there's a lot of people out there making a good living doing that. I suspect that one of these days they're going to be burning in hell. That may be a little rough. There would be no fees or dues. Our expenses were to be met by our own voluntary contributions. We know where that came from. It was to be the least possible organization, even in our service centers. And of course, you know, there's a lot of people don't bother to find out how AA is organized, because it is organized in a kind of a way. Because we got New York up here, and we've got general service office, and then the delegates go up there and they get to form a debating society for 2 years. And then under the general service office we have the areas, and the areas take in a pretty large chunk of property. And then underneath the areas we have districts, and the districts are the next step above groups. So you got the groups, you got district, you got the area, and you got general service office. And then you say, but whoa, wait a second, what about our central office? What about, what do they call it? The intergroup. What about intergroup? Intergroup is not in the organization chart of AA. It is, the intergroups are formed by the groups within that area and not, or within that geographic area, and many geographic areas don't have any intergroup at all. And then there's another very strange thing that if you, when you see how this thing's organized, if you go to state convention is not an AA function. It can't be, because it involves going across district and area lines, and it is not sponsored by AA. It is a part of what the intergroups put together within the state. And so many times when you go, you're going to find, for example, they're charging a ton of money to get into a state convention. And you say, well, why? You know, why can't I just go here and listen to these people come and tell their stories? Why do I have to pay money to hear them? But I can understand paying money to stay in a hotel, but why do I have to pay entrance fee to get into an AA function? Doesn't that violate the traditions? Well, it doesn't, because the traditions don't apply there. Now, you do have district and area conferences, and of course those are AA functions. So it's kind of interesting to see how this all comes together, and somehow or another it just works. And you know why it works is because there are a certain number of people who are willing to sacrifice their time and their effort and really put a lot of work and effort and time into these things to make them work. And it's almost always the same people year after year after year who do this. But the job gets done. Our public relations were to be based upon attraction rather than promotion. You know, we have to understand what this is saying, because a lot of people will, holy cow, where's the time go? A lot of people talk about attraction, not promotion, within our groups. And in talking about, let's say, our 12-step work, or in some way of trying to apply this to the things that we do just but among ourselves. This applies only to our public relations. And that means relations with the public, and it refers specifically to the media, but of course it could also be in any public gathering. We do not advertise, nor do we push AA. We let our works speak for themselves. And this, of course, is pretty close to our third step prayer, isn't it? We ask God to make examples of us to people we would help, so that they will see His power and His love and His way of life working in and through us. It was decided that all members ought to be anonymous at the level of press, radio, TV, and films, and in no circumstances should we give endorsements, make alliances, or enter public controversies. Now you can see where all of the traditions are incorporated in that paragraph. So, and this is nice to know, because if you want to review your traditions, it doesn't give the numbers here, but this one paragraph takes all the traditions, puts them in a highly readable form, and lets them, and shows how they all work together. The last sentence down there. While the internal difficulties of our adolescent period were being ironed out, public acceptance of AA grew by leaps and bounds. For there were two principal reasons. the large number of recoveries, and the reunited homes. These made their impression everywhere. Of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, and underline that, really tried, because that's the key here, who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once and remained that way. 25% sobered up after some relapses, and among the remainder, those who stayed on with AA showed improvement. Now those numbers don't seem to comport with what we see around here these days, and perhaps we should think a little bit about them and ask ourselves why. Why is it that of the people who come in here and who really try, 50% stick and never drink again? And that doesn't happen. Maybe it does. I don't know who's counting, but it doesn't seem that way. And then the ones that slip 25% come back and they end up in the fellowship and staying sober. And then the other 25%, some show up and some don't. Well, I think these are probably horseback numbers, not intended to be precise or that accurate. But to me, it carries a kind of a story that at the time that this was being written, AA was different in many respects than it is today. And I know that from my own experience, because it was quite different when I came in. Give you a couple of examples. There was no 90 and 90. The rule was 9 steps in 90 days or less. And the rule also was 15 and 30, 15,000 meetings in 30 years, and then you can back off a little bit if you feel like it. Nobody sat around and waited to be sponsored, because you see the tradition, the sponsorship tradition as it started out, is reported in the grapevine about 1944, 45, somewhere in there, was that the group would designate a member to be the sponsor of the new person. And their original duties were to help them just to get oriented and and if they needed a hospitalization, to help them with that, and introduce them around, introduce them to the group, begin the introduction to the Big Book and the steps. And so this was pretty much the way it was. I remember when I came in, this was 1964, 2 guys came up to me after the meeting and said, "We're your sponsors," and they handed me a book with a bunch of names and phone numbers. And they were right, they were my sponsors, and they continued to be my sponsors until both of them had died. And but I had no idea what was going on. But today we just cavalierly say, well, read the Big Book, come to meetings and get a sponsor. Well, what in the hell's a sponsor? And how do I pick one? And how do I know who would be a good sponsor and who wouldn't? Well, one answer to that is you might just kind of wait for God to shove you in the right direction, and maybe that works. But so much of the time, people are floating around here sometimes for years with no sponsor and no steps, hanging on by their fingernails, wondering why they feel so terrible, trying to stay sober with untreated alcoholism because there's nobody helping them. So we might want to think about that. I believe, it's my own personal opinion, the biggest problem in AA today is lack of good sponsorship. And there's so much diversity now of opinion as to how you work the steps, and when we read the book, we find the instructions are right there. I'd like to see a whole bunch of people just open the book up and be a sponsor and follow directions in the book and teach the directions in the book and see what happens. We're going to get recovery after recovery. This is the way it's always been, and it would be that way again today. And so when we look at these numbers, they might give us pause. We may want to stop and think, what's going on here? And we cannot, as Bill said in one of his articles in the grapevine, we cannot content ourselves, he said, with believing that people are not getting it. They're leaving because they didn't really want it, or because they never got past their self-will, or they never really worked the first step. We got every damned excuse in the world why people walk out the door and never to be seen again. Sometimes I think we ought to look at ourselves and say, what am I not doing to help that new person? Next time you see some real bummy looking guy come sluicing in that door, maybe crawling in on his hands and knees, watch, see how many people go up and give him a hug. And we have to ask ourselves, I think, why? Why is that guy not the center of attention? Isn't his spirit as important as mine? Of course it is. Do I believe that God got me in here? Most of us do. Then why don't we believe that God shoved that guy in the door? Sometimes it's just too much work, or we don't know what we're going to be doing with him, or we're afraid. Alcoholics Anonymous is built upon one alcoholic working with another. It's built upon the love, the love that we show for our brothers and sister alcoholics, and it's built upon working and self-sacrificing for other people. Other thousands came to a few AA meetings and at first decided they didn't want the program. But great numbers of these, about 2 out of 3, began to return as time passed. And we love to see that. You know, these days, it's like, how many people do you see who are picking up a white chip who this is maybe their 15th time or their 20th time? And we like to tell ourselves, well, they just didn't want it badly enough, or they weren't ready. Maybe, maybe not. What kind of support did they get? What kind of sponsorship was offered to them? Who was it that sat down with them and thoroughly explained the program to them to show them what it was that needed to be done? Who shared with them what they had gone through and how they recovered? How many of these people ever had someone sit down and tell them about the disease of alcoholism and what it means and how devastating it is? We have to ask ourselves these, because everything that comes down, everybody that comes in that door is a personal responsibility of everybody in this room to help, if we can. We're going to offer that help. Going on now on page 20, XX, middle of the page. Another reason for the wide acceptance of AA was the ministration of friends. Friends in medicine, religion, and the press, together with innumerable others who became our able and persistent advocates. Without such support, AA could have made only the slowest progress. And this is true, you know, in those days, I guess a lot of it had to do with the fact that AA was it was new, and it was something that was caught everybody's imagination. Well, these days, almost everybody knows that there's an AA out there, and every judge is sitting up there deciding to sentence people to us. And all, you know, so AA is not something unique anymore in the eyes of the public, but in those days it was. And a lot of people wanted to jump on the bandwagon because they could see the results. There were recoveries that were appearing all over the place as a result of this program. And people in the religious community, this is not by any means universally so, but many did come to believe that we had something here. Just a couple of days ago, I met with the minister of the Baptist Church in Isla Morada down in the Keys, and he's been struggling down there to help the people in his church. And as you probably know, the Keys are just loaded with drunks and addicts. I mean, they're just every place you look. And there isn't really much going on down there in way of help for them except AA. And this guy was beside himself because they were supposed to be able to get sober following the precepts of the religion, and yet they weren't. And so we sat and talked for a while. He's been coming to a meeting I do down there on the steps, and I had written the 12 Steps for Christians some years ago, so I gave him a copy of that, and I told him how to go about doing that. We get the people into your office and sit them down and show them how to work these steps, because what happens there is that the same great spiritual principles which are found in every religion are restated in the 12 steps as steps of action. So that what happens is that when we work the steps, we actually incorporate these great spiritual principles into our very being. They become a part of us. They become the way we live our lives. And so it's taking the spiritual program of the church and putting it into the everyday active life of the member of the church who happens to be a drunk or an addict. And they recover. But to me, this is a constant illustration that something more is needed for recovery from alcoholism, because alcoholism is the symptom of this underlying disease which basically centers on self. Selfishness, self-centeredness. And when we are buried in self, we exclude God. And it doesn't seem to matter how much we want Him, or how often we confess our sins, or how often we go to the altar, or whatever it is that the particular religion requires of us. Somehow or another, when our lives are based upon self, and we are making decisions based on self, and we're acting on those decisions, we exclude God. As the Bigbook says, we are blocked from the sunlight of the Spirit. And yet when we work the steps, we're doing exactly what the great religionists would have us do. We're putting the principles into action, and we are making them a part of our lives, and we're making them the way we live our lives. And all of a sudden, by doing this, we've opened up all of the blockage between us and God comes flooding in. And we know from our 10th step, right after a 10th step, that we do then enter the world of the Spirit. Something major happens. And we're restored to sanity. And we become God conscious. And we develop a vital sixth sense, the Bigbook calls it, which means that we have a direct connection with God. We're able to be inspired. We're able to be intuitively guided. And then we have a spiritual awakening. And all of this takes place automatically. It takes place because we work the steps. We follow the directions and work the steps. And in all of this, what we are doing is we are preparing ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. That's the ultimate goal here. Everybody would have you think the ultimate goal is sobriety. No. The ultimate goal is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. We need to teach that to the new people when they come in. Why are they here? What's going on here? And when we don't do that, I think we drop the ball entirely in our responsibilities. Going on now on page 20, XX. Alcoholics Anonymous is not a religious organization. Neither does AA take any particular medical point of view, though we cooperate widely with the men of medicine as well as the men of religion. If we are not a religious organization, then we must not deal or dabble in religious concepts. Things which are unique to religion or to particular religions. For example, AA does not deal with sin. Now there are a lot of people in AA who do, and that's fine because that's their religious belief, and that's fine. We have no problem with that. But we don't make moral judgments here. We leave those up to God. When we talk about confessing something, we're talking about admitting to ourselves, to God and other human being, the exact nature of our defects of character. Our natural God-given instincts warped and perverted by fear. We're going to admit our selfishness and self-centeredness and self-centered pride and self-delusion. We're going to admit our resentments and our angers and our rages. We're going to admit our dishonesties, especially dishonesty to self. And we're going to admit our fears. The 4 cardinal defects: resentment, dishonesty, selfishness, and fear. We find them in the 4th step, we find them again in the 10th step, we find them again in the 11th step. Those 4. Those 4 defects over which we have no power. We can no more be freed from them than we can be freed from alcohol on our own. We're as powerless over those defects as we are over alcohol. Now going on, alcohol being no respecter of persons, we are an accurate cross-section of America, and in distant lands the same democratic evening up process is now going on. By personal religious affiliation we include Catholics, Protestants, Jews, Hindus, and a sprinkling of Muslims and Buddhists. This is funny. More than 15% of us are women. Of course, we know that when this was written, that was quite a while ago. This was written in 1955. And remember that the fellowship had been around quite a while before the first woman ever got sober in AA. The Bigbook had been written in draft form by Bill Wilson when Marty Mann became the first woman member. I think we mentioned this a few weeks ago. Does anybody wonder how Marty Mann got sober? She was the only woman. She couldn't have a sponsor, right?
Yes, she did.
Oh, okay. Maybe that's not right. I don't know. She did get sober, God bless her. In fact, she helped a whole lot of guys get sober. She was the only woman around. She had the woman's touch. She was great. She was a great sponsor. Okay, at present our membership is pyramiding at the rate of about 20% a year. So far, upon the real problems of several million actual potential alcoholics in this world, we have made only a scratch. In all probability, we shall never be able to touch more than a fair fraction of the alcohol problem in all of its ramifications. Upon therapy for the alcoholic himself, we surely have no monopoly, yet it is our great hope that all those who have as yet found no answer may begin to find one in the pages of this book, and will presently join us on the high road to a new freedom. And when they wrote this book, that was exactly what they had in mind, wasn't it? They wanted this book to go out and be available to alcoholics everywhere. And nobody knows for sure how many alcoholics are out there in the United States or worldwide, but it's way up in the many, multiple millions, no doubt about it. Some people have estimated that something on the magnitude of 5 or 6% of the total world population is alcoholic. There are some areas where we find alcoholism is rampant in the high 60s and 70%. And yet, since the statistics are very hard to come by, we don't know how high up the scale alcoholism in terms of the cause of death, and yet we suspect that it may cause more death than anything else. So many people are not shown as the cause of death being alcoholism, but heart failure or automobile crashes or all kinds of things. Now turn please to page 23 or 25, depending on what edition you have. The doctor's opinion. We of Alcoholics Anonymous believe that the reader will be interested in the medical estimate of the plan of recovery described in this book. You see what they're shooting for here? They had asked Dr. Silkworth to try to do something here which would validate their efforts. That he being the medical man, they asked him to write a medical estimate on the efficacy of the plan of recovery which they describe in this book. Convincing testimony must surely come from medical men who have had experience with the sufferings of our members and have witnessed our return to health. Now, there were a whole bunch of doctors out there by this time who were amazed because the people, their patients, their alcoholic patients they'd given up on were recovering, clearly recovering. They didn't know how, they couldn't, they would probably have loved to take credit for themselves. Equally, there were a whole bunch of ecclesiastics out there who were likewise seeing recoveries within their congregations, whereas before nobody was recovering. And so they were coming to understand that something was going on here beyond what they knew. A well-known doctor, chief physician at a nationally prominent hospital, specializing in alcoholic and drug addiction, gave Alcoholics Anonymous this letter. He is, of course, speaking there of Dr. Silkworth. To whom it may concern, I have specialized in the treatment of alcoholism for many years. In late 1934, I attended a patient who, though he had been a competent businessman of good earning capacity, was an alcoholic of a type I had come to regard as hopeless. In the course of his third treatment, he acquired certain ideas concerning possible means of recovery. Now, when Dr. Silkworth, this was a little bit pompous of him, I must say, because what really had happened was that Bill had gone into that hospital to detox, and he wasn't seeking any more treatment from the hospital. He was working with Evie then, and it was being called upon by that time by members of the Oxford group, including Roland Hazard, so he was on a different course. But we can excuse Dr. Silkworth for taking some credit here, I think. That Bill was in the course of his third treatment. Now we're going to find that reported, by the way, if you're keeping score, on page 13, Arabic 13, it's in Bill's story. As part of his rehabilitation, come on, Silkworth. He commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics, impressing upon them that they must do likewise with still others. Now we're going to find that on page 14 at the bottom of the page. We're going to find that while Bill was still in Silkworth's hospital, he was inspired to believe and to understand that there must be thousands more alcoholics out there who could very well profit from what he'd been given, and it was important for him to carry this to them. And he took this idea to his friend Ebby, and Ebby said, absolutely, Bill, faith without works is dead. And it was then that Bill was inspired to believe and to understand, and he gave us the rule, which so many people, I don't know if they've ever read it or not, but it's right there at the bottom of page 14, top of page 15, that if an alcoholic fails to enlarge and perfect his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for other alcoholics, he cannot survive the certain trials and low spots ahead, and he will drink again. This has become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. Please notice that Dr. Silkworth was aware of something that we are woefully unaware of today, that this is a family disease. And the meetings which they were holding in those days were meetings with the families. Read the chapter to wives, read the chapter to family afterward, and you'll see. They recognized that the wives needed to be involved, and that and even the children were involved. And this was not some kind of a stylized meeting where if you don't read everything exactly as in the format, somebody's likely to have a crazy fit. They met in people's homes and they served the coffee and cake. And they helped each other. And this meeting could go on as long as they wanted to. And the families were there. So it's a growing fellowship of these men and their families. What do you suppose would happen if they were transported to today and every meeting was a closed meeting and they were told, your wife can't be here, your husband can't be here, they're not a member, they're not alcoholics, you can't have them in this meeting? What do you suppose would have happened? Sometimes I think we get so damned foolish. You know what the Big Book says? Bear with me on this. It says, the world of the Spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive. It says it is open, we believe, to all. Why don't we just understand that? What in the world are we doing trying to keep all this stuff hidden to ourselves? What is it that gives us the right to take spiritual principles, which have been around since man has existed in a sense, in a sentient phase where we're able to comprehend anything or write it down. Been around all that time. And we take these spiritual principles and we clutch them to our bosoms and we say, these are ours, you can't have them. Don't you come anywhere near our meetings, you non-alcoholics. And I'm scared to death you might rat me out. You're going to run right down to my banker and tell him I'm an alkie. You're going to run over to the PTA and tell them I'm an alkie. We can't let you do that. I don't mind drawing a line at somebody who comes in here with a pad and pencil and is trying to get their master's degree in psych. I can see drawing a line there, but why in the world do we exclude our families? How can that possibly be justified? He says, I personally know scores of cases who were the type with whom other methods had failed completely. And boy, he's not kidding. Those scores of cases were right in his hospital. Can you imagine how frustrating it must have been? And he talks about that in his opinion, you know. How frustrating it must have been to have all these modern facilities and all this high-paid staff, all of the most modern equipment, and yet they couldn't get these people sober. And they knew that the only people that they could really help were the ones who hadn't gone too far yet. And generally speaking, these were going to be people who just drank too much, but could stop or moderate on their own given sufficient reason. They couldn't touch us. We were impervious to the human solution. Still are. But sometimes I wonder if we've got that through our thick skulls. We are impervious to the human solution. It does not work for us. It doesn't. Because our problem, being a spiritual problem, has no truck whatsoever with human solutions. The solution has to be a spiritual solution. Going on down the bottom of that page, these facts appear to be of extreme medical importance because of the extraordinary possibilities of rapid growth inherent in this group. They may mark a new epoch in the annals of alcoholism. How much of a prophet was he? Wow. He saw it coming. But of course, you remember, this guy had been immersed in this business of treating alcoholics and addicts for a long time, and he realized the extent of the need. I mean, just huge percentage of the population afflicted with this disease. These men may well have a remedy for thousands of situations. Dr. Silkworth tried millions upon millions upon millions. But nevertheless, he was on the right track, wasn't he? Now, this next sentence would be what I would love to have as my epitaph. I don't know, maybe I can convince some of you to make sure I get it. You may rely absolutely on anything they say about themselves. Boy, oh boy. Now you see what he's doing here, guys. Since this book was written as the adventures, the experience of the people who wrote it, remember back in the board of the first edition, to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered, is the main purpose of this volume. And now Dr. Silkworth is saying, read this and understand that whatever they say about themselves, that this is what they did and this is what happened when they did it, you can believe it implicitly and explicitly. You can believe anything they say about themselves. This was the imprimatur these guys needed, and they loved it. But after this letter came, they got together and they said, whoa, this guy's, he's good. Maybe we can get some more juice out of him. Let's see what we can do. So here's what they did. The physician who at our request gave us this letter has been kind enough to enlarge upon his views in another statement which follows. In this statement he confirms what we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe, that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. Now it's pretty obvious that we're nuts, but the medical guy says your body is just as screwed up as your mind is. You are abnormal. You do not fit in with the general population. It did not satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, that we were in full flight from reality, or we were outright mental defectives. I hate to tell you, but you're an alcoholic. Let me have a second opinion. You're also ugly. Can you just hear people pontificating on these terms? You're sitting and you come to somebody and you're some gigantic medical guy or psychiatric guy with a great reputation, and you're paying a ton of money to this guy, and he says, well, you see what's wrong with you, Jim? You're just maladjusted to life. Gosh, I know that, Doc. My life is a mess. I mean, there's no doubt that I'm not doing very well. That's why I'm here. Oh, well, then it must be that you're in full flight from reality. Now, in those days, there was no political correctness, so you can imagine this doctor sitting there with his pipe, You're in full flight from reality. That'll be another $100, please. Now, if I don't accept that, and I say, no, Doc, I'm accepting all this as real, well, then I hate to tell you, son, but you're a mental defective. Jeez, but this is what it was. This is what it was. Well, how do you get past that? How do you find somebody who's going to be willing to treat you when their opinion of you is that you're mentally defective, full flight from reality, and you're maladjusted? Okay. These things were true to some extent, in fact to a considerable extent with some of us, but we are sure that our bodies were sickened as well. In our belief, listen to this now, in our belief, any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out this physical factor is incomplete. Well, that's certainly true, but let's turn it around. If you don't have the physical factor, you ain't no alcoholic. If you don't have this reaction of your body to the ingestion of alcohol, you by definition are not an alcoholic. There are lots of people around these rooms who are not alcoholics. They can drink alcohol without the phenomenon of craving kicking in. They don't have the allergy. But that's okay. We're very happy that they're here. Very happy. They have a desire to stop drinking. That's the only requirement. These are the people Dr. Silkworth was able to help. The doctor's theory that we have an allergy to alcohol interests us. As laymen, our opinion as to its soundness may of course mean little, But as ex-problem drinkers, we can say that his explanation makes good sense. It explains many things for which we cannot otherwise account. Now we all know that's true too for us. Though we work out our solution on the spiritual as well as an altruistic plane, we favor hospitalization for the alcoholic who is very jittery or befogged. More than often than not, it is imperative that a man's brain be cleared before he's approached, as he has then a better chance of understanding and accepting what we have to offer. Now, how many times have you seen some poor drunk walk in your rooms and he's all befogged, and he's not only is he shaky, and he's just had his last drink about 30 seconds ago, and everybody descends upon him, we're going to help him. Wow. You know, it is literally impossible, because there's no way we can get through that fog. Now, we may be able to help him find a place to bed down. We may be able to get him to the hospital if he needs it for detox. We used to try to find a place for them on the couch if we could. A lot of places in this country have Olano clubs that don't have here. They're open 24 hours and have a couple or 3 couches, and we'd take a guy in there and put him on the couch and sit with him for 2 or 3 days if necessary. Don't do that much anymore because at least in cities there's detox places all around. You know why there's so many detox places? You ever stop to think about it? You know how much they get for detox? You'd like to guess? By insurance companies or the government? $500 to $800 a day. Now, you try to get a detox now because the cities have gotten a little bit tighter on their zoning. If you go down and take a look at the zoning map for the city of Miami, you're going to find that they have little clusters where it's okay to have a detox. But of course, if you look at the, try to buy some property there, you'll find that it's totally impossible. This is tended to make a monopoly out of the existing detox places. And they get huge amounts. That's a tremendously lucrative business. I suppose there'd be a whole bunch more of them if they'd allow them. I'm sure there would be. But in any event, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to work with somebody who's drunk. And the Big Book talks about that in the 7th chapter and tells us at least wait until, you know, they've come down a bit, and let them get a little bit remorseful. Let them be in a mood to at least listen to what you have to say. And that certainly works a lot better. If you're going to mess with them, though, and you're not taking them to the hospital or detox, you better have some booze around. You don't want them dying on you. You might have to stick a little bit into them just to keep them going. Okay, now we've come to page 27, Roman 27, or Roman 25, if you're in the 3rd edition. And this begins the doctor's opinion. The doctor writes, "The subject presented in this book seems to me to be of paramount importance to those afflicted with alcoholic addiction. I say this after many years' experience as medical director of one of the oldest hospitals in the country treating alcoholic and drug addiction. It was therefore a sense of real satisfaction when I was asked to contribute a few words on a subject which is covered in such masterly detail in these pages." And he is right. You won't find anything comparable to this big book in any of the literature anywhere on this subject, believe me. We doctors have realized for a long time that some form of moral psychology was of urgent importance to alcoholics, but its application presented difficulties beyond our conception. Think about moral psychology. Dr. Silkworth, I think, and his reputation is that he was somewhat of an agnostic, he certainly was not heavily involved in any kind of religious stuff. So he wanted to give a name to what he saw was going on in his own hospital. So he called it moral psychology. Now, this is a very interesting tandem, isn't it? On the one hand, you have morals, on the other hand, you have psychology. And you'd have to wonder how it is that these two things are tied together. Isn't that an oxymoron sometimes? Probably. But it certainly does not mean that everything that is moral has some kind of a psychological explanation, nor is it tied with psychology at all. What are morals? It has nothing to do with psychology in the ultimate sense, does it? But nevertheless, this is what Dr. Silkworth chose to call what he saw happening in his hospital. He saw miracles of healing going on, and he saw these guys praying. He had to know that there was a higher power involved. He had to know it. And he did. He did know. But he was being very, very careful here. But he admits that it presented difficulties beyond their conceptions, their ability to handle. In other words, they were powerless. With our ultra-modern standards, our scientific approach to everything, we are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. Man, and you know, if the powers of good, if you be very simple, wouldn't it, to put a capital G on that and take out one O. And so, we know what Dr. Silkworth is talking about here. We are perhaps not well equipped to apply the powers of good that lie outside our synthetic knowledge. Now, when we read the three pertinent ideas, no human power could restore us, to whatever it says. I almost never stumble over the Bigbook, guys, so you know you just caught me in one of those rare moments. It must be probably a senior moment of some kind. Or one of those strange mental lapses. But he's talking about something here where he's expressing complete frustration. What in the world is this hospital there for if it isn't to get these chronics sober? To be able to treat the addict and the alcoholic who are dying from alcoholism or drug addiction. And he can't help them. And he's admitting it here. Outside our synthetic knowledge. What a wonderful word, synthetic. You know what that means? It means human solutions, doesn't it? Synthesized knowledge. We have synthesized all this stuff. Synthetic, like I don't know, like nylon or something that isn't even man-made. I mean, it isn't even made in nature, it's man-made. And that's exactly what their treatment facility was. It was a man-made facility, using man-made methods against a spiritual problem which was absolutely resistant to their methods. Many years ago, one of the leading contributors of this book came under our care in this hospital, and while here, he acquired some ideas which he put into practical application at once. What a neat way of telling. Oh man, he acquired some ideas which he put into practical application. You see how hard it is for Silkworth to say that we had this guy come in here for the third time and we couldn't help him. He was here twice before and we weren't able to help him at all. He was a hopeless, helpless alcoholic who was going to die in a year if he didn't quit drinking, and we couldn't help him stop drinking. He came back for the third time, and there was a guy wandering around here that was talking to him, and they were praying together, and he got up and he walked out, and he's been coming back ever since trying to help the other people in my hospital that I can't help. And he's doing it. But he says he acquired some ideas. Oh. How about he was taught some spiritual principles and how to apply them in his life? That's exactly what happened. Later, he requested the privilege of being allowed to tell his story to other patients here, and with some misgiving, we consented. Boy, I'll tell you what, that misgiving goes on today, doesn't it? Try to get some of these treatment centers to let you come in and do anything with their, what do they call them now, clients? Zombies? Thorazine shufflers? There's one outfit down in Miami, and years ago I used to go in there, and so did Janine, and they would let us go in, and we could grab off 2 or 3 of their clients, and we put them through the steps right there while they were in the treatment center. Boy, they put a stop to that. They couldn't stand that crap around them. I mean, after all, these are people who are highly trained in all of the healing arts, including group therapy. Oh yeah, with some misgivings, we consented. We were very big about it. The cases we have followed through have been most interesting. Did you just see that guy with the pipe? Most interesting. In fact, many of them were amazing. Well, I hope to tell you they were. People they'd given up on, consigned to the scrap heap of life, who were dead ducks from the word go, and they were walking out, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and coming back a month later and saying, "Hey, Doc, everything's just great. Give me another one of your hard cases. I want to work with them." How do you explain that? The unselfishness of these men as we have come to know them, the entire absence of profit motive, and their community spirit is indeed inspiring to one who has labored long and wearily in this alcoholic field. They believe in themselves and still more in the power which pulls chronic alcoholics back from the gates of death. Silkworth, you finally got it right. Power capitalized with a big P. That's got to be a deity, and we probably will have no argument from you if we call that deity God. And he's saying now, they believe in themselves and still more in the power which pulls chronic alcoholics back from the gates of death. And it is that power alone which does it. Because he knows that all the human solutions fail. There's only one answer, and he knows it, and he sees it. It is God.